everybody. I'm Mr. Wagstaff. Welcome to the course on Civic Literacy. So, in civics is what I'll call it the whole time. In civics, we're going to learn a lot about how the United States government works, what our role as citizens are in it, what we are expected to do, what we expect the government to do, how our society as a whole here in the United States of America works. So in this first unit here, we're going to really talk about how we came to be. We're going to talk a lot about how America decided to become America. So we were originally owned by England. We were colonies. We decided not to be colonies and to become our own country. And it's an intricate and really cool story of how that works out, how we came up with the founding concepts and principles that we use today in our government. That sounds like a lot and it sounds confusing, but we're going to break it down. There's a lot of cool stories and you're going to like this. So let's go ahead and get started here. So our first lesson that we're going to have in this course is going to talk about the early influences on American government. So this whole unit that we're going to have here is on the Revolution. And while, yes, the Revolutionary War is important, battles of Saratoga and Yorktown, a lot of that is more specifically for U.S. history. We're going to talk more about the revolutionary mindset that takes place during the Revolutionary era, which allowed the United States to create a government that really had never been created before. And we're going to start talking today kind of the foundation of the founding blocks of the United States. So again, you might be like, what? You're just saying a bunch of words like, so let's just get in and actually talk about some stuff that is more concrete. All right. So let's talk about some early influences of American government. Stay with me. You're going to like this. All right. I know that this all seems kind of abstract, and it is, but let's put some concrete stories along with these abstract facts of this stuff like the Magna Carta and situations like that. All right. Let's start here. We are going to be in England in the year 1215. God, how long is this course? Now, when we talk about America, we're going to start talking about really the late 1700s with the Revolutionary War, taxes, Boston Massacre, Boston Tea Party, stuff that you may have heard of before, maybe an expert on it, maybe not, but it is important today to talk about how we got there. So in England, back in 1215, before Europe knew about the New World, they had a king, a guy named King John. All right. Now, kings at the time, all right, including King John, there is this concept of divine right. So divine right was this concept that kings had. Divine means godlike. The belief for thousands of years, we will say, for monarchs, which means kings in Europe, we'll use England here specifically, is that the reason they were king, why this person was a king and not anybody else, is because God chose them to be king. So there is this belief among the population for a very long time. The reason the king is God chose them, and therefore they are more than a man, right? They are closer to God than anybody else, and everybody was very religious. So whatever the king said, of course, that made sense because that's what God wants them to do, and that's the divine right. So the kings basically carry out God's orders almost. So nobody questioned the king. If it was a bad decision, nobody questioned that because, hey, obviously that's what God wanted, we'll go with it. People didn't question this for a really long time until this dude, King John, comes out, all right, in 1215. There were some other issues in England, but to clarify here, he wasn't good. He was really bad at his job. He did a bunch of stuff that was incredibly selfish. And the people in England in 1215 started realizing, wait a minute, there's no way God would tell any human, much less a king, to do the things this guy's doing. And they realize this dude is bad. He's doing bad things for the people. So they basically force King John, and here's a picture of King John. They didn't have cameras at the time, so this is a drawing of it. This is King John sitting down, all right? And basically the people rose up on King John and says, we're done with this. You're not going to keep doing awful things just because you're the king and you can do whatever you wanted. So they sit King John down. Literally, they sit him down here and kind of against his will. It's either this or get murdered because the people rose up against the king. This had never happened before. Other countries had tried to attack a king, but never their own people in mass. Like the majority rise up to him and say, we are done with you having unlimited control. And they forced King John in 1215 in England to sign this thing called the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta says you still get to be the king, and not only does it apply to King John, but it's going to apply to all kings after him. And he's forced to sign it or be murdered. The Magna Carta says, yeah, you get to be the king, you get to make decisions, but at the end of the day, you have to do what's right for the people. If you keep doing shady stuff, you can get overruled by the people. And they're going to create like a government, they're called a parliament, that can stand up to the king a little bit. The Magna Carta is incredibly important in American history because, as this cartoon right here shows, the Magna Carta wraps up the king. It puts a little control on the king. This is the first time in 1215 that England, the people in England, have stood up to the king and says, no, you can't do whatever you want. You have to do what's right by the people. There ends up being this expectation in England. The king is expected to do what's right for the people. And if he doesn't do what's right for the people have a right to stand up to the king. This is a whole new concept. This is really important because this becomes the standard in England, is that the government is expected to work for the people. All right? So that's why the Magna Carta is important, because a couple hundred years later, all right, 300-400 years later, England is going to set up colonies in the New World, what we call America today. So all of the people who leave England and come to the New World, they are still British citizens of England, under the English king, all future kings. But the new belief now, all right, in the New World is that the king is going to do what's best for the people. The king doesn't, have just unlimited power all over the place. So the question here is, all right, is how did the Magna Carta begin to change in the way in which people viewed their government? All right, so how did the Magna Carta kind of change that relationship between government and the people? And then give an example of something our government isn't allowed to do today. Because if you're a king, you could literally do anything that you wanted to anybody. Think of something that the government today just would not be allowed to do. The wildest and craziest thing that you can imagine. All right, what can't they do today? Because the reason they can't do that really stems back to the Magna Carta in 1215, which is the very first time there starts being limits and a change of relationship between the people and the government. So to answer this completely, pause me if you need to. I'm very pausable. All right, pause me, answer this completely, and we'll move on. So we already in America, in the colonies, we're going to jump ahead a few hundred years, all right? So we're like 1600s or so. Colonies exist in the United States. In the United States, I keep saying the United States doesn't exist until the Constitution. The colonies, British citizens over here in the New World, there is a new concept that has been sweeping the world at the time, all right, called the Enlightenment. This is also going to be very important for our government, all right? So the Enlightenment is also called the Age of Reason. So one of the biggest situations here with the Age of Enlightenment is people got smarter. They started questioning things, all right? And a lot of it goes back to, if you've had world history with the bubonic plague and everybody died and they realized, hey, maybe we should figure out why things happen. Because for most of human existence prior to this, the reason things happened was God wanted it that way. Religion was a huge part of society. So nobody questioned why things happened. When the bubonic plague happened and like a third of the world's population died, people were like, I'm pretty sure God may not have wanted that to happen. Maybe we should learn things to prevent another bubonic plague from happening and wiping out a third of the world's population. This is going to lead to the scientific revolution, which is like science, observation and experimentation. With that movement, where people started questioning things, comes out the Age of Enlightenment, also called the Age of Reason. All the smart people got together and realized, why do we do things the way we currently do as far as the government goes? There could be a new way of doing things. And this is a painting here of a whole bunch of famous people of the Enlightenment. There's a lot of famous people that come out of the Enlightenment we're not going to talk about. Probably one of the more famous ones that's got a cool story that isn't really fitting here, but it's Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton discovered gravity. Now, that seems weird today, because what do you mean discovered gravity? So he didn't invent gravity, he discovered it. It was always there, he just discovered it. Because this is how, like, they go all the way back to the basic. And he's literally, the story of him sitting down under a tree and watching an apple fall, actually, that's a true story. That's actually what happened. When the apple falls down, instead of being like, oh, apple falls down, like we would, he says, why? Why does that apple fall down and not up? Why does it not fall sideways? Like, that's a deep thought if nobody had ever actually thought about that. And he comes out and does, like, he's very smart. He also helps invent calculus. So Isaac Newton, and with math and stuff, can basically prove that gravity exists, that there is a force pulling stuff downward, all right? So all the things you have accepted in the past, even things you can just accept, like gravity, gets questioned. Why does it exist, all right? Because of that, this is also viewed as the Age of Reason. This whole time period is called the Age of Reason, using logic. And here's where the big one comes in with this Age of Reason. Why do we let the king tell us what to do? Why? We have the Magna Carta. He tells us what to do. It has to be within reason, but we have the Magna Carta. Why do we listen to the king? And the reason still was, well, God put him there. And they're like, but did he? That starts to change. People start to think the king might just be a guy. That would make more sense than God choosing him if we're being logical about it. He's probably just a guy who got really lucky to who he was born to. So maybe he doesn't have divinity. He's not godlike. He's just a dude. The reason that's so important is during the Enlightenment, when people start questioning whether or not the king is a god, if it's just a dude, he can make a mistake. Because people didn't question the king when they thought he was part God, or he was at least appointed by God, or being told what to do by God. But now if it's just a dude, no different than any other dude, maybe that's not the best way of doing things. Maybe instead of having one dude make the decision, you have a group of people make a decision. Once the concept of God gets taken from the king, there's a whole new way of looking at the possibilities of government, and it basically opens up the sandbox to, all right, so if we're not just going to go with the king, how else would we run a government? So the question here is, when people stop viewing their king as a divine figure, how did this begin to change their society? All right, what did they start to question, and why did they start to question it? So pause me answer that completely, and we're going to move on. All right. So, important thinkers. These guys we're getting ready to talk about, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Baron de Montesquieu, very famous in American history, and they never came to the colonies. We're never here, all right? These guys, they're thinkers. They're like, hey, all right, so the king isn't special. He's just a dude. Cool. So that might not be the best form of government. How else can we design government to benefit the most amount of people? And they all come up with their own ideas and their own nuances. They write books about it. It's not very popular because there's still a king. They're in Europe when they're writing these books. There's still a king. People don't like this. The king doesn't like the idea that they're questioning, the style of government, because it would mean they lose power. So these guys aren't famous when they're alive. Most of them are not. We're going to focus on these three, but there's a bunch of them. They're not real famous when they're alive. They write books, they have these ideas, and they typically die penniless, not well known. These guys, specifically these three, become a crazy famous now. I mean, you're learning about it in a survey course on civic literacy. This is John Locke. We got pictures and paintings of them, all right? And they weren't famous at the time when they were alive because their books and their ideas lived on. People like Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, Benjamin Franklin, these famous Americans that we'll talk about later on in this unit, they read these guys' books when America, the colonies, are deciding how we as a society want to create a government. And these guys' ideas live on long after they pass away. So these men are much more famous today than they were when they were alive. John Locke here. John Locke, the main concept that we as Americans present day took from John Locke is his idea of natural rights. All right? John Locke believes in this idea that as a human you have natural rights. A king can't just say, well, I'm going to kill you because I don't like you. Like the government does not, without committing a crime or anything like that, that you have a right, a natural right. A government can't take your natural rights from you. All right. So John Locke, his quote here is, "New opinions are always suspected and usually opposed without any reason but because they are not already common." This is the 1600s version of different. And so his ideas, while he's alive, aren't super popular because it was different. But his most famous contribution to American life, all right, is his concept of natural rights. He says people have a right to life, liberty, and property. You have a right to live. Nobody gave you that. When you're born, you have a right that's natural. You have a right to liberty. You can do what you want. Nobody has to give you the right to liberty. You naturally have that. And then to property. Now, this is the one that gets lost in translation a little bit because eventually when we write the Declaration of Independence and Thomas Jefferson, he uses this. He says everybody has a right to life, liberty, and in America, it's not property. It's the pursuit of happiness. And the reason that is because at the time there was primogeniture in England. Property, only certain people were allowed to own property, all right, based on where you were born, all right, in your family line. So that's why when he writes life, liberty, and property, it means a little different than it would in America, where America and the colonies never used the concept of primogeniture, which limited who could own property. So that is why it's a little different. But he's all about natural rights, rights that you have as a human that you don't get from the government. And the government claims that they have a right to give you life or liberty or property or pursuit of happiness. That's not a thing. You have that already. And that is going to be something that really gets internalized by the colonist. The next guy here that's very influential in America, and we're going to reference him again, is a guy named Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau, one of his lasting concepts that he's going to have that's going to get absorbed by who we call today our founding fathers, your Thomas Jeffersons, Alexander Hamiltons, George Washingtons, James Madison, these guys, all right, is his idea of the social contract. Now, when you come up with ideas of how to run a government, nothing is not the social contract law theory. It's always a work in progress because sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, all right? But Jean-Jacques Rousseau talks very much about the social contract theory. Why does a government exist and why do people follow the government? And what should that relation be like? His ideas, and America really does take a lot of these to heart when we create our Constitution, our set of rules to live by, is that America or a society, as citizens, you give up some individual freedom in exchange for peace and protection, all right? Like, there's just rules that you have to follow in society, but society as a whole, all right, the will of the people should rule things, all right? And he calls it a natural law. Bathrooms. There's a guy's bathroom and a girl's bathroom, all right? If you are a guy or you're a girl, you can't go into the other bathroom, all right? That's just like social contract, right? So you'd be like, I have to take away my freedoms. I should be able to go whatever bathroom I want to, you know? Well, in a society, all right, it's just kind of different. You go to whatever, like you give up your right to go to the other bathroom, all right, in order to have basic stability in society. It's the contract of is the social contract theory, and that is just the example I'm using. I'm realizing in modern society that could be controversial. Anyway, that's a whole nother thing that we'll talk about. Just the idea of changing concepts over time in a much later unit. Anywho, so the social contract theory is the idea that people give up some rights for security and protection. Where is that boundary at? All right, and we still see that today. After the 9/11, September 11th attacks, there's a lot more security at airports. All right, and the question is, how much security are people willing to go through in order to be safe? Where is that line? How much privacy with the Homeland Security? How much privacy are people willing to give up? Can the government spy on you to prevent another terrorist attack? Where is that social contract at? And it is kind of a moving line. But Jean-Jacques Rousseau talks in detail about you have to have that social contract, and it can vary, but it basically depends on the will of the people. Because the government, this is the big one, the government is designed to serve the people. Not the other way around, not like a king. The people aren't there to serve the government. The government serves the people, and they're there to serve the will of the people, and the understanding that you have to give up some stuff to get something in return, and that is the social contract theory. The third guy here, and we're going to talk about his concepts in depth through a lot of this course, that Baron de Montesquieu says, all right, so say we create a government by the people. There's a whole bunch of people run a government, all right, instead of just having a king. The problem is people are naturally corrupt. Let's just accept that as it is. Yes, it would be great if you have a whole bunch of fantastic unicorn people who will not abuse their power if they get into the government. But let's be honest, that's human nature to abuse your power. Because a lot of other people want to fight against that. But like, we'll pick the good people to do it. Baron de Montesquieu says, no, that's not going to be an effective long-term solution. So here's what you need to do. And he's the guy, instead of having these ideas like natural rights, social contract theory, he's like, all right, here's what we're going to do. All right, so he's very straightforward. If you create a government, and I said we end up copying this dude almost word for word when we actually do create a government. He goes, you need separate branches of government. So you have a federal government that runs the country. You need 3 different branches, all right? Each branch of the government controls 1/3 of the federal government. Everybody in those branches gets elected or however you pick them. However, politicians are naturally corrupt. This prevents them from hurting the people. Because here's what happens. Politicians, they're corrupt because they try to get more power. The 3 branches of government completely separated from each other. right? They have to work together, but there's nobody overlapping in both branches. So if somebody's corrupt, they're going to try to make their branch more powerful. Well, the moment one branch of government gets corrupt and tries to become more powerful, who's it take power from? The other two branches. Those two branches, also filled with corrupt people who want more power, would never stand for that, and they will team up and fight against that one branch to make sure everybody has their 1/3 amount of power. It's called checks and balances. Just make all the corrupt people fight each other. That way, society, you're basically using their corruption against themselves to play fair, because corrupt people have to keep other corrupt people in check. It's called checks and balances. And Montesquieu comes up with it, and nobody had ever really done this before. America, spoiler alert, will create this, and it really does work well. And a lot of countries, after America does it for the first time, is going to copy the United States, because it is a very effective way of keeping the government from being corrupt, because the government, even if they're all run by corrupt people, they basically keep a check and balance on each other, because if somebody else gets too powerful, it takes power from you. And people in the government don't like losing power. Knowing that, and knowing human nature, he designs this 3 branches of government concept to basically prevent governments from becoming corrupt. And we are going to, meaning the colonies, very much support this idea. So the question here is, name one thing that all 3 of these men had in common when it comes to their view of government, and how can you see that in today's government? So, if you can answer that already, Paul's been answered, but I'm going to help you out on this one. All of them said who should control society. All of them think it's the people. That the government should serve the people, not the other way around. The people don't exist to serve the government. It's the opposite. All 3 of these guys feel very strongly on that, and when America creates our Constitution, that is the fundamental concept. The people run the government, not the government running the people. Answer that completely. That's as far as we're going to get today. We're going to start getting into more details and really cool stories as we go further in this unit. So answer that completely. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys tomorrow.